Okay, let's pray, guys. God, thanks for tonight. Thank you just for Wednesday night. It's a time where we can come, have fun, be goofy during a game day that no one got seriously hurt in our Mates game. God, we just love you for the time that we get to come together, refuel, God, get back on the same page with you. I pray that as we continue to look at your series, God, that we'll be challenged to stand up for our faith, to continue to rise to the occasion, God, that you called us to. You called us to be leaders in this generation that so desperately needs leaders, good, godly leaders. We love you and just stand for it. All right, sweating all. So we're more than halfway into our series. We're going to take a break. Obviously, next week is Operation Christmas Child that we're going to be doing, and so we're going to take a break from our series called "We Were Born Again to Lead." And you guys should know the idea of this, okay? Once you accept Christ into your life, okay, He reigns in us. He wants to reign in and through us. He wants to use us for His purpose to expand His kingdom. And in order to do that, we have to step up. We do, as individuals, as young men and women, in your grade school, in your home life, in your friends, in your sports teams. You are called to step up. And so the idea of this series has been to encourage you guys to lead the group around you. If you're a freshman, you can do it. If you're a senior girl, you can do it. Anyone can do this. Everyone is called to lead. So we've been looking at different characters in the Bible to relate with them, right? We see that they're human, that they make mistakes, and God still uses them in powerful ways. And I really enjoy it. I hope you guys have gotten something from it as well. Last week we talked about how not to lead. Okay, so we talked about how to lead, and last week we talked about how not to lead. Who were we talking about last week? Yeah. So, yes, thank you. The one person. Okay, we talked about King Saul. Okay, and King Saul was a bad leader. He was the first king of Israel. As we saw last week, he was the first king of Israel. Samuel anointed him. And Saul started on this. He was doing really good, and then he kind of went downhill, right? So we read about what happens to leaders who decide to take matters in their own hands, who decide to rely on themselves, who decide to rely on their own strength and timing rather than trusting and relying on God. That was the main idea last week, was that Saul relied on himself rather than God. Okay? And we saw that and we read about his downfall and what took place with that. But what I want to do, I want to take a real quick side note with Saul. I want to see what happens when we try and do things our own way, when we try to rely on our own strength, timing, and leadership. You see, some of you guys are going to the world very soon. We have a big senior class here, and even if you're not a senior, you'll be going to that same world. College is just around the corner. And you have the choice to allow God to continue to work in and through your life, or you have the choice to ignore Him and do things your way. So King Saul was an example of what happens when you try to do things your own way. And that was an encouragement, okay, for you guys. Think of it this way. What if Saul relied on God's strength, or waited for God's timing, or trusted in God's leadership? Would we be reading a different story of Saul? Yeah, right? We would be. But what's the difference then between your life and Saul's? The message to everyone here is, when we try and do things on our own, we will fail. I don't care if you become a millionaire without God. I don't care if you marry the prettiest non-Christian guy or girl in the world without relying on God's timing. I don't care if you become the most popular kid in college without trusting God's leadership. You will become spiritually bankrupt. And you will try and fill that void or that hole in your life that can never be truly filled or satisfied. Saul is a perfect example of that. That's why we wanted to look at it last week. God gave Saul the choice to choose, and Saul failed. He lived his life outside of God's intended purposes for him. So my encouragement last week was don't lead the way Saul chose to lead. Instead, rely on God's strength, timing, and leadership. So let's pick up where we left out last week. Okay? Samuel has now gotten the message from God that it's time to pick a new king. Right? And you guys know who that is. We'll talk about it last week. David. Right? So 1 Samuel chapter 16, the chapter is amazing. We're gonna blow through it. Okay? We're gonna just read right through it. I'm gonna skip some parts because we're short on time. But I really want us to catch the beginning of David's life. Okay? I think we know about David, like the majority of David's life and the screw-ups that he did. But I really want to kind of focus on his early life. Okay? Some of the right when David becomes anointed king by Samuel, a little bit before that. So 1 Samuel 16 starts off by God is talking to Samuel. Hey, I want you to go to this village and I want you to find the next king. So Samuel does that. That's what the high priest did. He did whatever God told him to do. That's what the prophet did. That's what the prophet did. He did what God told him to do. So if we pick up in verse 2, Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears of it, he's going to kill me. So he's asking God, if I go to this village, Saul's going to kill me. Saul is getting super controlling. Okay? And God said, take a heifer with you. Maybe that's the first time I've ever heard that term. But it's in the Bible. Okay? Take a heifer with you, which is an animal, a cow. Okay? Take it with you to sacrifice. And tell Saul, I am going to go sacrifice this to God. And invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I declare to you. So Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came and met him trembling. So people are meeting Samuel, who's the prophet, and he's like Saul's sidekick kind of, and they're kind of freaking out because of how dangerous Saul is and how unstable he is. So they come a little scared and shaken up, and they say, do you come in peace? Do you come peaceably? David feared the prophet Samuel, and Samuel said, yeah, I come in peace. I'm coming to make a sacrifice. So consecrate yourselves and come to me at the sacrifice. And so he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to take part in the sacrifice. So Jesse, this is the new character that we meet, that Samuel's talking to. He wants to consecrate him and his 7 sons that were there with him. Okay, that's 7 out of 8 sons that were there with him. And all that consecration means is to cleanse, like a ritual cleansing process to get ready to sacrifice with Samuel. So Samuel's getting them prepared to do this. Verse 6, when they came, he looked at Eliab and thought, surely the Lord has anointed this man before me. So Samuel's thinking in his head, as Jesse's kind of like one by one, these sons are coming before Samuel, and he's like, okay, God, is this him? And he sees this son of Jesse, and he's like, he looks like a great guy, right? He looks like a king. And so Samuel's thinking to himself, surely this is him. But God said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance, or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. It's a great verse. I know we've gone over that verse before, but this is in the context of a reading. It's really cool. God is looking at the heart. He wants the king who has a good heart. So then Jesse continues to call son after son and pass before Samuel, and Samuel kind of goes, nope, next, nope, next, nope, next. Right? All these people are passing by in verse 8 and verse 9 and verse 10. It says, then Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has chosen none of these to be king. Do you have another one? Because mine is still here. Right? Do you have another son that's here, that's not here? And it just says, yeah, I have my youngest son who's tending sheep. That's his job. It's like the hand-me-down job. Okay? He's taking care of sheep. And Samuel says, yeah, get him. And send him to me, please. So they go and get the youngest son. Verse 12, they brought him down before Samuel. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. "This is he." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David that day forward. So we're going to kind of fast forward a little bit here. That in Saul's life, he gets a little crazy. Okay? He gets some crazy pills and he just loses it a little bit. And the only thing that can seem to calm Saul's crazies is music, which is like half of you in here, right? If you're freaking out and trying to be like, oh, like it's so much better. That happened to Saul. When he heard the music playing, he calmed down. So verse 18, where we're going to pick up, the story. It says, "Behold, I've seen the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent a messenger to Jesse and said, "Send your son David, who is with the sheep, to me." So Jesse, David's dad, loaded up a donkey with bread and wine, and a young goat. It was kind of like, hey, we're going to do David with everything else. Like a gift. And David came to Saul and entered his servants. And Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent Jesse saying, yeah, I like David, so let him stay here forever. That's my paraphrase. Verse 23. "And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hands. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him." If you ever want to look up something creepy, look up lyre on YouTube. And the first thing that you'll come across is Saxon lyre player, and it's weird. So if you're in, I was like, what is a lyre? Listen, YouTube that, which is bad thing to do. And Saxon lyre comes up first. Just watch it, okay? Do that later on tonight. Tell me what you think. Remember Joseph's story? 2 weeks ago we talked about Joseph and the ups and downs that Joseph faced in life. And we really talked about how God works in mysterious ways. How bizarre is David's story starting to shape? I mean, let's think about it. He again is the youngest brother, which is rare. You always went with the eldest son to become the inheritance, to become the one who took over when the dad passed away. David's the youngest, a shepherd, being chosen to be king. How does David get his foot into the kingdom? Like, you got to think of David's situation. He didn't anointed, and he's thinking, okay, the kingdom's over there. I have no family in there. How am I going to get in there? And God uses David's musical talents, which calmed Saul's spirit down when he got crazy. Saul loved David as his own, and Saul even makes David his armor bearer, which is a very high position to have. As Saul went out to the battlefield, he would have kind of like his armor, and then be an armor bearer, but extra armor for him. He was like his shield was damaged or something, like, okay, fine, all this damage. Okay? That's what the armor bearer did. He's like, oh, you want a dagger? I got 3 of them. Right? And he was like, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. I don't know. But that's what he did. That's an important job to be. So not only did David play music with Saul, not only did Saul love him as his own, Saul gives him a very high position. So the next chosen king, David, played the lyre, and carried his armor in battle for the current king of Israel. Isn't that just so crazy to think about? That is how God works in mysterious ways. Can you guys trust that He is in control of your life? Through the ups and downs, through the crazies, God will use your talents to expand His kingdom. So why was David such a great leader? I believe it's because David was a humble man who sought after God's heart. Humble leaders know where they came from, giving glory where it's due. You see, I think a humble leader knows where they came from and gives glory where it's due. So many times when we get out of something or overcome something, we automatically get our head a little bit bigger and think, I did that. Yay me, right? do. Humble leaders lead with confidence, not arrogance. Humble leaders are compassionate, forgiveness, full of grace and truth, and they can balance that with confidence. They know they're in position because God put them there, so with confidence they lead in a mighty way. And you guys know David's story. He leads in a mighty way. And David, at a very young age, he was a shepherd who spent many days alone with sheep, which would be awesome. But not. Okay? David, at a young age, was a shepherd who spent many days away from family, shepherding this flock, protecting this flock, mending and taking care of it. This job he couldn't help but develop humility. It's tending sheep. Come on. They're not the brightest. Okay? David had a lot of time to think, and all he ever thought about was God. He loved God from the start. He wrote psalm after psalm. There's 150 in our Bible. Psalms praising God and His goodness. The Psalms are extremely personal, if you guys have ever read them. They're extremely personal, they're very real. And one of the ways that David was a man after God's own heart was because of how real he was with God. So even in some of the darkest times of David's life, since you guys know some of the things that he did. He had an affair. He had a husband killed. Okay? Not really a good checklist of, if you're thinking of a guy after God's heart, there's a few things far from that list, right? And yet God still called him and gave him that title. So even in the darkest times in David's life, he turned towards God. Whereas some of us, we instantly turn away from God, David runs to God. David knew that God knows everything, so why hide it? Why mask it? He had this 24/7 relationship with God that was genuine, honest, truthful, authentic. Can you see why God chose David as the next king? But more importantly than that, can you see why God gave him the title, a man after God's own heart? So every week I encourage you and challenge you guys with, okay, where do I begin to lead it? And we've looked at Hezekiah, Joseph, Josiah, and they all had different, very interesting stories of how God worked in their lives. But tonight specifically, we're talking about David and his leadership style. And how do we begin to lead by that example? And I believe in order to be a good leader, you have to have a humble heart. You have to be a humble leader. So in our small groups tonight, we're going to discuss really what that looks like in our lives. What humility looks like and how we can use that as a strength. Not a weakness, as a strength. So as you guys break up into small groups, that's kind of the focus for today. Okay? So guys will be up here.